Welcome. I'm Sebastian Mahfood, and you're listening to WCAT Radio, the on-air wing of En Route Books and Media, bringing you the dulcet sounds of Catholic wisdom.
Folks, welcome back to the show. This is your host, Pat Flynn. I am joined once again by the mighty and magnificent Big Pete Groehler. Pete, how you doing?
Good. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, so you've been doing some exciting things. You've got your podcast going called The Right Side of Things, where you take a look at the world through Catholicism, conservatism, and Christian apologetics. How's that been going, by the way?
Good. Getting some interesting guests on. I mean, yours truly has been on several times. Into the future, I'm hoping to get my former college professor and C.S. Lewis expert and critic of all things leftist education, Dr. Duke Pesta on.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, our schedules haven't really been mashing up lately, so that's in the works, though.
Well, that's good. So what's been on your mind recently? What's had your attention, so to speak? Any topics of interest? Any problems in need of solving?
I've been, of course, with my political leanings, I've been waiting on bated breath to see what the midterms will bring. Hopefully we can get some folks in office that can continue to or begin to make positive changes in our country.
Yeah, and that's an interesting thing too, and that's something that I've wanted to dedicate my time and attention to, partly through this radio station. And Pete, I know you're doing a good job with this too, is getting Catholics out there to help re-energize and reinvigorate Catholics to embrace their faith and embrace it fully. So that way they bring their faith into politics, because somewhere along the way, and we could probably break this down into various notches, but it might not be all that productive for this conversation, but somewhere along the way, people thought for some reason you should just separate religion and politics. Like they shouldn't have anything to do with one another. And that has never really made sense to me, because if religion is ultimate commitment, if this is what God has specifically stated to us about how reality is and how he wants our relationship to be to him and other people, and politics is just the affairs of men, mm-hmm. How wouldn't these things be related? Why wouldn't they be related? It should be your religion that absolutely informs your politics. And people will often ask me, people say, well, be like, Pat, you seem like a kind of conservative guy. What are your politics? I say, my politics just are my religion. That's it. Like there's no difference there. Like my Catholic beliefs inform all of the political decisions I make, or at least as many as they possibly can. They don't necessarily inform some of the technical nuances on economic decision making, but you know what I'm saying, right?
Right.
But yeah, so thoughts on that? What do you think is going on there?
Well, to start off with, just to take us all the way back to the founding of our country, and I've made this point on your show and my show when you were a guest as well, but I feel like it always bears reiterating, is the founding fathers never wanted people to derive morality or the way they should live, or the founding I guess what I'm getting at is they saw both the church house and the schoolhouse as the bearers of where people would really get their morality from. I mean, this country was essentially founded by colonists wanting religious freedom. I mean, granted, they were Protestants and not necessarily Catholic by any means. But I mean, you know, the colonies continued to split along religious lines. Maryland, especially, was founded as a Christian or Catholic colony because of it was named after Queen Mary,
Mm-hmm.
Mary Queen of Scots, who was tried to take England back in the direction of Catholicism, but we see how that ended up for her.
Well, well, it's kind of
she's called Bloody Mary for a reason.
Well, it's ironic that today's episode is on November the 5th, Guy Fawkes Day, and a friend of mine on Facebook, funny guy, good sense of humor. This guy put up a meme that said, "I see you're wearing a Guy Fawkes mask. I too want to blow up Parliament and install a Catholic theocracy."
But that's funny. But I mean, you can go along that route too with us making the assertion of, you should really use your religious beliefs to back into your politics. I mean, if you're sitting down across a dinner table from someone that doesn't agree with you, their initial thoughts are going to be, you want to install a theocracy. You want the church to rule over politics. And that's really not what we're saying at all. The First Amendment, while trying to get government out of religion and vice versa, while doing that at the same time, it's not to exclude religion from the public forum at all.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, we're supposed to debate on the moralities and where our country is really set to go in motion in a public square, because the founding fathers saw that as extremely valuable.
Well, and that's exactly it. People seem to get it in the reverse. It was really to protect religion, to stop any one particular, denomination from gaining the power of the state, so to speak,
right,
and stamping the other ones out. It was a protection mechanism for religion. And yeah, I think that's where people get a little bit confused. They think if you say, well, my religion is my politics, it doesn't automatically make a person a theocrat, because there's still that very important question of, okay, do you think that religion should be imposed, or do you think it should be proposed? Right? I think it should be proposed. I don't think it should be imposed upon somebody, but I think it does need to be, and it's essential that it's proposed in the public forum, so to speak.
Right.
So while my Catholic faith informs my political decision making as much as possible, that doesn't mean that I want it pressed down onto people from a sort of top down theocracy by any means. But I do want a strong religious proposal in the public forum, in political debate. It needs to be there. But again, somehow along the way, it became impolite or improper or whatever to mix religion and politics, which I think is just one of the very devious schemes of a otherwise increasing secular parasite. You want to call it that? And I'm hoping that this will start to turn around. I think this is where we actually can learn something from our evangelical comrades. Comrade is a poor choice of word, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Where they are very forward about their religion being proposed and being very clear that no, I'm going to a lot of them anyway. Certainly not all evangelicals, but I think there's a case to be made that they certainly do it more than most Catholics, and that Catholics can learn something from that general attitude.
Yeah, I see that along the lines too. And you mentioned this parasite of secularism in government. I guess one of the root arguments would be positive versus negative rights, and I can kind of define that for our listeners. The Constitution and the Declaration of Independence are based off of the concept of negative rights, also known as natural rights. We are endowed by our Creator with certain unalienable rights. Our rights come from God. The Founding Fathers saw that as extremely important to distinguish our rights as human beings and as citizens of this nation as being negative rights coming from God. Therefore, they're not positive rights in that the government neither gives you those rights nor can take them away. And I think one of the trappings, especially of the modern day, is we've so convinced ourselves that we have positive rights. The government gives us certain things that, whether they're rights or not, is often up for debate. Things like, access to government housing and the food stamp programs and things like that. I'm not arguing that those aren't important and that those don't save lives, but to argue that you somehow have an inherent right to those given to you by the government, and then they can pick and choose who has those rights and why we can take them away for the quote unquote greater good. I mean, you see this a lot with the Second Amendment, especially, is that's been a hotly contested debate of the pro-gunners holding that, no, you can't take the right to bear arms and defend myself away from me, whereas people on the other side see it as, I'm going to give up my guns because the government giveth and the government taketh away.
Yeah, I think another really important part of that conversation is how this is, and I use the word parasite with secularism intentionally. I mean, what is secularism if it isn't a parasite? Its entire existence depends on trying to rebel against something, particularly religion, right? It feeds off of something. It cannot even exist on its own. Mm-hmm. But, go back to the great Catholic tradition and the great Catholic thinkers, and you have this moral framework that gives people a sense of duty and virtues that are worth developing: caring for the poor, tending to the sick, treating your neighbor as yourself, duties that should be able to plug the gaps and holes that would and have emerged in various free economies. And I mean, go back to the origins of social justice as a Jesuit, before it was hijacked, right? Before it was hijacked right, and totally corrupted. That is a perfect example of both the moral and practical good that religion being proposed, specifically the church, can provide to help stabilize and cause a free society to flourish. You remove that, you push that out, you limit that by the state, and then of course you're going to get something like this ridiculous idea of positive rights that people are entitled by some ephemeral, not quite explainable substance to the services of another person. Yet you can't really make sense of that. Rather than that person understanding that, no, I have a moral duty to care for my neighbor and wanting to do it voluntarily, rather than having these things imposed by the force of the government. It's all backwards. It's completely backwards, right? And so many of these things could have been avoided and could be corrected today if we just could return or get back to that proper moral framework and once again have religion, have that freedom for religion, again, be brought forward, get the state out of as many affairs as humanly possible, but especially out of religion, but have religion brought forward again into the political sphere. How that is going to happen, I'm not sure. I think there is something of a cultural shift where I think it sort of is happening right now. I mean, just the fact that Donald Trump is president, largely because of evangelicals, is, to me, a sign of that happening. So I don't know if we need to be entirely skeptical, but I think we need to continue pushing in that direction.
Right. Yeah. I mean, John Paul II said at many World Youth Days that really if our generation, you and I being at the crust of just inside the millennial gap, if our generation and generations to follow really embrace the faith, we could, and John Paul said, we could set the world on fire for Christ. And that's really kind of been, the embers are simmering again, so to speak. And I think especially with, we talked on my show about the Brett Kavanaugh incident and everything that's kind of been surrounding the current government, is people have seen an incredible lack of morality on the part of the government, and people are starting to think that, I used to think these people might have my best interest in mind, but not so much anymore.
Yeah, I mean, it's the angelistic fallacy, right? I mean, human nature is what it is, and nothing teaches it better than the Catholic faith and the Catholic Church. But yeah, I mean, tomorrow's going to be an interesting day. I mean, we are the day away from midterms. Pete, I trust that you'll be out there casting your vote, doing
I will indeed
your bare minimum civic duty in the state of Wisconsin. In the state of Pennsylvania, and been talking to a lot of people, specifically at the church, making sure we're going to get them active. I mean, the church was good because it actually at our parish handed out a guide for the pro-life candidates. And again, there's an example where your Catholic faith should absolutely be informing a political position, hands down. I mean, no exceptions there. It's one of those things where you got to have this kind of hierarchy of priorities. And, you know, maybe you have something that, you know, you have an opinion on taxes. Maybe you're kind of a low tax person. But if it comes between, you know, I would argue a moderate tax person who's at least pro-life, seriously pro-life, or a low tax person who's pro-choice, I got to go with the pro-life guy, even though I'm very much against higher taxes.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
Now, ideally, we could get both. I think consistently from somebody who is coming from a Catholic position, sort of a natural rights position, you just can't get to anything like a big state. You just, especially a totalitarian position, it's just too inconsistent. It's too conflicting with natural law and natural rights. So the sort of conservative position will by default fall out if you follow through on the great Catholic tradition and theology. So, you know, we will see. It's hard to always have that ideal candidate, isn't it? But you just got to use prudence, which is that great virtue, to try and use wisdom from the past to make a good decision now or tomorrow for the future. And
right.
And you know, offer up some prayers as well. It can never hurt. That's good, Pete. I mean, election's coming up. It is the 5th of November. Good old Guy Fawkes Day. Which reminds me, I should probably watch V for Vendetta tonight.
Yeah. Not many people know that Remember the 5th of November was actually said about 400 years before that movie came out.
Yeah.
It was actually written in a poem by, what's his name? John Milton.
Mm-hmm.
And in remembrance of Guy Fawkes.
Yeah, he's an interesting character. I would encourage everybody, perhaps maybe didn't go about settling matters in the best possible way, but definitely an interesting character worth reading the history about.
The
so
gunpowder plot. Yeah.
So what else, Pete, is on your mind? Any other projects or topics that you've been trying to tackle or discuss theologically, philosophically?
Well, it's interesting that you went down the road of pro-life when you talked about political candidates, and I've been seeing lately a lot of arguments, especially with the election heating up, that, you know, the church and a lot of Catholics out there, you know, you're simply pro-birth, you're not pro-life, in that, you know, the church has exercised the use of the death penalty since the dawning of Catholicism, really, with you know, the stonings of heretics and things like that. And, you know, there isn't a lot of Catholic support for things like welfare programs and things like that. And I kind of, me being, you know, the Catholic troll, so to speak, on social media,
the bulldog apologist. Yeah.
That same friend I have that prompted our episode that you could find on my show with the question is Jesus red-blooded Leninist Marxist? You should, folks, if you haven't listened to that episode on my show, you should really go over there. Me and Pat have a hoot of a time.
Yeah, it's a fun one. Mm-hmm.
Going through that one. But she actually posted something of a sister that said, essentially blah, 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 blah. You're not pro-life. You're just pro-birth. And, Catholicism or Christianity hasn't really stepped up to the plate after the baby's born. And I kind of said, listen, you loon. Across the world, Catholic charities help approximately somewhere in the ballpark of 30 million people a day in some form or capacity. We can go down the road of our Supreme Court's decision in the 1970s, a horrible decision. Roe v. Wade, if you really want to read a prime example of legislating from the bench, that's a extremely pertinent example of the court really overstepping their bounds. If you were to read the affirming decisions, Roe v. Wade essentially says that a woman has a right to privacy in an abortion-style situation, and essentially that abortion should be legal, meaning it should be not be bound by the law, accessible, meaning you should be able to essentially get one on any street corner, and they finish it with rare.
Mm-hmm.
It's not necessarily rare in our culture when we've essentially worldwide killed off maybe 4.5 generations worth of people.
Yeah, it's been an absolute holocaust of unparalleled proportions.
Holocaust is a extremely relevant word to it too.
Yeah, you'll often hear things, like this, and you got to kind of take the conversation back. Okay, well, can you give me some examples of where you think that the church is letting people down after the pro-birth thing? But even that, it doesn't necessarily follow. Sure, yeah, it's certainly better to have a baby be born than not at all. Even if there aren't all the social safety nets there to begin with. Either life is intrinsically valuable or it's not.
Mm-hmm.
And I was talking to Peter Koch. You'll have to meet him. My other Peter friend, and he's a bioethicist, of course. And we were actually on the topic of euthanasia, which we know that the church is strongly against and rightly against. And he presented his case as a bioethicist is, again, like, even in the case of whether euthanasia or suicide, if you say that you value somebody's decision to end their life, it's kind of incoherent, right? Because you value their decision because you value them. You're affirming that there's something intrinsically valuable about them which makes their decisions valuable. Yet their decision is to terminate that thing that is intrinsically valuable.
Right.
It just doesn't work. So if you say, I respect their decision, you're implying that they have some type of value or dignity as a person, which then goes to buttress against any type of argument that you could possibly give about a suicide or assisted suicide or abortion or whatever you have be okay. Now, the death penalty is interesting. And I think Ed Fazer has a lot to contribute here. And the death penalty is one that I will say, I admit, I think there's very strong arguments on both sides. And I haven't completely made up my mind on this myself. But it certainly doesn't interfere with the abortion argument. These are completely separate things. The death penalty argument, if you take in a sort of a traditional view on it, can you have to look at things in light of eternity, not just here and now. Sometimes people make a very naturalistic assumption when thinking about the death penalty. Like if this life is all there is, well, then it doesn't matter either way.
Right.
Like, who the heck cares whether somebody lives or dies? Life is meaningless to begin with, right? It just it just doesn't matter. All arguments fall apart. Death penalty, it just doesn't, like, nihilism prevails, right? So, but if this life isn't all there is, if we're looking in light of eternity, there's good arguments, and many thinkers thought that the death penalty, if it gets somebody to repent, see the error in their ways, it can serve as a sort of intermediary or we could call it preparatory or pre-purgatory in some ways. And there's certainly a case, will that happen all the time? Who knows, right? Is it justifiable all the time? Again, who knows? But there's a case to be made in that direction where if you can implement something at this point of somebody who is truly a danger to society, a danger to other people's lives and other people's salvations, right? Which is why the church was so hard on heretics before. I mean, think of the greatest crime that you could commit. It's not, given the Catholic worldview, it's not killing somebody. It would be ruining their salvation, right?
Right.
So if anything is deserving of the highest form of punishment, and I'm not saying it is, because again, I haven't made up my mind on this, but following that reason, if anything is deserving of that form of punishment, it's that thing which would be even worse than killing somebody, which would be damning their souls, right? Which is what the heretics were notoriously being condemned for.
Right.
So if you could put certain preventative measures, and that's where people don't always think of the death penalty, right? There's certain practical preventative measures there. One is just the deterrence factor for criminals to begin with. Two is as a negotiating factor. Having the death penalty on the table has undoubtedly produced confessions and led to the prevention of many other further great crimes when people know that the option very well could be the end of their life if they don't make a plea, right? So there's many good arguments I think to be made on both sides, and it's something that I study with great interest, having not taken a very solid or firm position myself. And I think the other thing that people put the death penalty off the table is we take a very kind of Western-centric view on this, where we have fairly decent prison systems, but that's not the case in all parts of the world, is it? Right?
Right.
You can't necessarily, and even in our parts of the world, you can't necessarily safely detain all criminals. I mean, people put hits out all the time from prison. Even in prison, they manage to kill other people. So it's a very complicated matter, but it's a different matter than the abortion question. Because now we're dealing with moral agents, people who have made moral decisions, who have autonomy and so on and so forth, whereas the fetus, the baby, has not had that chance, has not had these decisions. So it's just a red herring. It's just a diversionary tactic.
Yeah. And, with the current atmosphere surrounding where am I going? The synagogue shooting in Pittsburgh, which is right in your backyard. I talked to our mutual friend, Alex Salkin, actually about a week before that happened, about the left's and Americans, even just generally, skewed perceptions of Israel and the Middle East. And I put that episode on my show about a week before that happened, and I followed up with Alex on that day, and he really had a lot to say. And I posted, I pray for everyone involved, including the soul of the shooter.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And I got hung up and down for that. How could you say that? Blah 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 blah. And all I posted in response is a quote I love from Lord of the Rings. It's in the Fellowship. I'm so glad Jackson included this quote, and Peter Jackson, the director, included this quote in the movie series. It's when they're down in the mines of Moria, and Frodo has had the ring for a while, and it's kind of starting to eat at him.
Mm-hmm.
And he says, "I wish the ring would have never come to me." And Gandalf says, we can't always pick the burdens that we take upon us. And Frodo continues to kind of spiral down, but Gandalf brings him back, and Frodo says it's a pity Bilbo didn't kill Gollum when he had the chance. And Gandalf replies, "Pity? It was pity that stayed Bilbo's hand. Many that live deserve death. Some that die deserve life. Can you give it to them, Frodo? Do not be too eager to deal out death and judgment. Even the very wise cannot see all ends." My heart tells me that Gollum has some part yet to play, for good or ill, before this is over. The pity of Bilbo may rule the fate of many.
Coming from an extremely conservative and traditional Catholic.
Very much so. and I think that sums it up brilliantly.
Mm-hmm.
My stance on the whole thing. And I've mentioned that I've had a background in law enforcement, especially. And, I've wrestled with this topic. I worked in a correctional setting for a couple years, and I dealt with the worst and the baddest of them all. And I've really thrown this question up in the air: is, could I participate in something like that? Although Wisconsin is not a death penalty state, does my faith align with me participating in something like that? Dealing with someone that's on death row, or taking them and, executing the state's court order for them to be put to death and things like that. And it's really been something that I've been reading up on, the values of human life that we talked about, but and especially with, my strong affirmations for us in our Catholic faith of reconciliation, really wiping the slate clean for us. And, we can.
Well, and I think that's the main thing is, again, even when we have these difficult questions, what is the orientation? Well, the orientation is that we should will for everybody to be reconciled to God and everybody to be saved, no matter what they've done. That is what we ultimately want. Now, again, what is the best way to get that? God knows, right? In every situation, we're not in a perfect epistemic position to possibly know that. And that's what makes a lot of these questions difficult. But that's also what gives us a lot of moral development. I mean, we don't get moral development without difficult moral situations. It's training, just like we don't get stronger without difficult weight training situations, without difficult exercise, physical exertion. Same thing with morality. It's just part and parcel of the process of what God intends for us. But just because some situations are difficult doesn't mean that other situations aren't exceptionally clear. And that's where the abortion one is. Yeah, I'm sorry. There's just no good arguments for the abortion debate so far that I've heard. And the vast majority of arguments are just complete non sequiturs, red herrings, or just straw man positions. They're just
right.
And I saw recently a survey, and I didn't dig too much into it, to show that younger people are actually becoming increasingly pro-life, which was optimistic to me. And I think part of that has to do with the revolution of YouTube and social media and podcasts, of that they're actually hearing the pro-life position possibly for the first time ever in their lives. And as soon as you hear the position, as soon as you hear the arguments, pro-choice it just doesn't have it. It just doesn't have it, which is why it's always had to rely on censoring and bullying the pro-life position, because it can't engage in a serious, honest argument against it. So, I mean, it's one of those things where if you're a Catholic and you're listening and like you're up on the air of who to vote for, look at these foundational principles of your faith and ask yourself, does this person align with these principles? Do they reflect the types of values that I, as a Catholic, am obligated to hold and hopefully do hold?
Mm-hmm.
Indeed.
And to that I say amen.
And to that I say amen. So, Pete, thank you for joining me once again. Everybody be sure to check out Big Pete's show. Pete, what's the website? What's the best way for people to go find your stuff?
I'm on Google Play. Search the Right Side of Things podcast. Also on iTunes for those people that so embrace the Apple iPhone. You can really find me anywhere. If you, much like a lot of my listeners, my mother especially, are not app inclined, I am on Facebook. I post all my episodes on my fan page that is at the Right Side of Things pod, all one word. Search that on Facebook and you should be able to find me. Post all my episodes there. Like I said, some exclusive content, some things for commentary especially. that's where I initially did my follow-up after the shooting with Alex Salkin. And I think a lot of good conversation went on there. But, yep, find me wherever your podcasts are sold, so to speak.
Yes, indeed. Well, we will be having another conversation with you again, my friend. Thanks, as always, for joining me. And, folks, thank you for listening. We'll catch you next week.
We hope you enjoyed the program and will join us back for another show on WCAT Radio. This is Sebastian Mahfood. Good day.